Putin acknowledged that Russia managed to seize less than 1% of Ukrainian territory in 2025, while the country itself is experiencing a fuel and economic crisis. Under these circumstances, 2026 could become a crisis year for the Kremlin. Military analyst, veteran of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and retired Ukrainian Armed Forces Major Oleksiy Getman reported this in a chat on Glavred. He noted that despite the beliefs of many, internal upheavals in Russia are inevitable, as happened with the Soviet Union, the collapse of which no one foresaw several months before its collapse. It's hard to say anything is brewing in Russia right now, but we've destroyed more than half of Russia's oil refineries, and the crisis is gradually gaining momentum in Russia. However, for now, this crisis isn't on a scale that would bring Russians out onto the streets. They're afraid of that because even solo pickets with the sign "Peace" on an A4 piece of paper are banned in Russia. The analyst notes, but it is also inevitable that the people, fed up with the government, will soon take to the streets. Getman noted that a totalitarian system operates in Russia, but it cannot exist indefinitely in the face of a sharp deterioration in living standards. A change in power in the country, he said, depends not on the population but on the elites, who will sooner or later begin to react when faced with serious financial difficulties caused by sanctions and declining revenues from oil and gas sales. The situation in Russia is already critical, and the crisis isn't that far off. If this process continues and Putin doesn't unleash another war against the Baltic states or launch some missiles or drone attack against European countries, distracting the Russian population from domestic problems, then it's quite possible that 2026 will be a year of power crisis in Russia. He concludes, recall the USSR had a significantly more powerful economy than today's Russia, but even this didn't save it from collapse. The collapse of the Soviet Union was primarily due to economic reasons, particularly the sharp drop in energy prices. Now, according to Andriy Novak, chairman of the Committee of Economists of Ukraine, Russia finds itself in an even more difficult situation and has effectively reached a dead end. The economist explains that the Kremlin will be forced to make some major sacrifice to maintain even a chance of survival, either end the war, which Putin is incapable of, or cut funding for other budget items. However, the latter option would lead to an economic collapse within the country, which would severely impact both the population and businesses. Novak emphasized that even at the time of its collapse, the Soviet economy remained stronger than the current Russian one. This is the diagnosis that can be made from the Russian economy today, Novak said. A critical moment for the Russian economy and energy system will inevitably arise if Ukraine continues to strike oil refineries. Economists predict that with constant financial expenditures and money printing, Russia will be able to keep the economy on the printing press for no more than a year. As Andriy Kovalenko, head of the National Security and Defense Council's Center for Countering Disinformation, notes, Russia has effectively become China's raw materials appendage and is forced to import gasoline. This is all the result of Ukraine's precise strikes on its refineries. Political scientist and director of the Center for Analysis and Strategy, Igor Chalenko, notes that Ukraine's intensified attacks on strategically important targets in the territory of the aggressor state could influence Vladimir Putin's political position and force the Kremlin to change its stance on the war. In the Kherson area, the Russian army is suffering from internal attacks, particularly the mass exodus of personnel. At several positions, occupiers are deserting due to massive assaults, which, due to their lack of forethought, result in heavy losses. There is no rotation in the Russian troops, so these newly minted deserters are fleeing toward Crimea. This was reported on the Telegram channel Atesh. To prevent the disintegration of its units, the command of the Dnieper Joint Forces Group sets up checkpoints near Amiansk in Crimea. Military police are catching fugitives and conducting thorough document checks. Deserters are seizing residential buildings and, if they are discovered, they will use weapons, the partisan movement warned. As a reminder, this is not the first time desertion has occurred in the Russian army. As reported on October the 8th, 36 soldiers from the 217th Airborne Regiment abandoned their positions in the Kherson region, presumably heading to Crimea. The Occupation Forces Command is taking harsh measures in response. Mobile search teams have been created, offering cash bonuses and vacations for the capture of fugitives. Captured soldiers face court-martial and harsh punishment. However, instead of strengthening discipline, these actions only increase panic and distrust within the units. Representatives of the Atesh movement have once again appealed to Russian military personnel not to return to the front and to take advantage of the opportunity for safe evacuation. Earlier, the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reported that Russian command was ordering the limbs of its deserters to be broken and used as bait on the front lines. According to the main intelligence directorate, one of the enemy soldiers deserted from the front but was detained near temporarily occupied Mariupol. The deserter's legs and arms were broken, and he was then taken to the front lines to act as bait. Ukrainian intelligence learned of this from radio intercepts. It's worth noting that this attitude towards soldiers is typical of the Russian occupation army. Russian troop commanders, disregarding casualties, force soldiers to attack. It's gotten to the point where, in some areas of the front, the Russian occupiers have run out of infantry, so even the wounded, signalmen and cooks are being forced to participate in assault operations. The main intelligence directorate also learned of this from radio intercepts. A similar situation has developed for the enemy, for example, in the Hulyai-Polye sector in the Zaporizhia region. According to the Ukrainian partisan movement Atesh, some Russian military units in the Pokrovsk sector of the Donetsk region have created groups to search for deserters. If a deserter is found, they are transferred to an assault unit.